All right, coming up in just a
Hurricane
few
Irma
minutes,
expected
we're
to hit
expecting
Florida
to hear
early
the latest
tomorrow morning. I'm Victor Black. We'll continue our special live
Florida
coverage.
Governor Rick Scott
Nearly
will be holding a news conference
5.6 million
at the top
people
of
in
the
the state
hour.
have been ordered
We will
to
bring you that live
leave, to
when it
evacuate.
happens. Christy,
Meanwhile,
back to you in Atlanta.
hundreds of FEMA officials
5.6
are
million
working
people
double
already
shifts
under
now
those
to
orders to
coordinate a
evacuate.
response
Millions
to
more
what will come
taking shelter.
after
Fortunately, there
Irma,
is still
the
room in
aftermath.
shelters. We
Christy,
want people to
let's go back into
understand
you.
that they do still have time. Some of them to get to some of those shelters, get out of homes. That's something you might not be thinking about. But hopefully, Victor, in this morning's we hope you stay safe. The crew stays safe.
The Miami Dolphins already canceled tomorrow's game against the Bucks.
Florida Governor Rick Scott as soon as he walks up to the podium there.
He's taking the players, the coaches, and the staff, chartering a plane, flying them to Los Angeles to play the Chargers, where they don't play till next Sunday. So that team is going to stay there all week to keep them safe and away from the storm, their families as well. The Jacksonville Jaguars play the Texans in Houston for their season opener tomorrow, and they will stay in Houston after the game. They're going to monitor the storm, evaluate the situation in Jacksonville Monday to see if it's safe for them to return. Tampa Bay also in Irma's potential path. So the series between the Rays and Yankees next Monday through Wednesday is being moved to from Tampa to New York to the home of the Mets. Finally, the U.S. Virgin Islands have already been devastated by Irma's wrath as a Category 5 hurricane, and the rebuilding process is just beginning. Basketball legend Tim Duncan was born and raised there, and the future Hall of Famer is asking for help. He wrote an emotional article in the Players Tribune yesterday and called it, "Don't Forget About the Islands." He's on a mission, Christy, to help raise funds for relief efforts there. He's personally donating $250,000, and he's going to match up to $1 million as well. He has already, as of this morning, raised nearly $450,000. You can go to youcaring.com/21 U.S. Virgin Island Relief Fund if you would like to help him out in his efforts.
And those people, certainly. Thank you, Coy, so much. Appreciate that.
This is CNN Breaking News.
So glad to have you with us as we watch Irma come ashore. I'm Christy Paul in Atlanta. Victor Blackwell is in Miami, where the sun looks like it's starting to come up, Victor. And so the rain is coming down.
Well, the rain is close. I actually saw one of the guys on the other side of the camera kind of point behind me. They can see it coming. Chad Myers said a few moments ago we're about to get slammed, and we are. But you said the sun is coming up over Miami, West Palm Beach, sunrise in Tampa as well. Hurricane Irma is closing in on Florida right now. A very strong Category 4 storm. You can see the wind picking up here. The area is also expected to get some of that driving rain very soon, but as the eye wall gets closer, storm surges as high as 12 feet are expected. Now, these pictures of Irma were taken by hurricane hunters, and you can see this is huge, wider than the state of Florida. There have been so many comparisons to Hurricane Andrew back in August of 1992. You can fit a couple of Andrews into Irma. More than 5.5 million people, as we've said this morning, have been told to get out of those evacuation areas. Roads and airports have been jammed. Hundreds headed to county shelters. In some areas, thousands of people. Now, some spent the night on the road waiting for the shelters to open. But for those who are planning to just stay where they are, Governor Rick Scott has these words.
Let's stay together and help each other. Don't get on the road. We have shelters in your community. Go to those shelters. I mean, you can go to your family, go to your friends, go to those shelters. But we don't want people on the road when the storm starts to hit.
That comes as no surprise.
We've got a team of reporters across Florida, across the Caribbean. We're going to start in Cuba, which is getting the worst of Hurricane Irma right now. CNN's Patrick Oppman is there live, and it's been pretty rough for you for a couple of hours now, Patrick. How are the conditions now?
Fisher Island, that's just to the north of Miami.
We've been getting battered all night and now all morning by Irma. You think the worst is past, and then it picks up, hearing roofs being torn off. You'll just pan over here, you'll get a sense of the force of this incredible storm. This used to be the seafront here in Cayman, Cuba. It is now the sea. I'm watching waves go by where there are people walking yesterday, cars driving by. It is completely underwater. We ourselves are only able to continue reporting here because we're on a second floor story of a building, but the water continues to come up quite quickly. It's about 6 feet high now. We've got about 4 more feet to go, probably before we need to get to higher ground. So it is a very dangerous situation, particularly for the people, most of this town, who only have a 1-story house. There were people yesterday who did not want to evacuate. They were going to stay in their homes. I just can't imagine how they are doing now. It is a terrifying scene here, Victor.
Patrick, we've heard from government leaders across the Caribbean before Irma approached that they were not prepared for the storm. To what degree was Cuba prepared for Irma?
You know, Cubans have a lot of experience with hurricanes. They don't have any other option but to prepare. And the government was moving resources into this area ahead of the storm to be ready as soon as the storm leaves, to try to get in here immediately and begin to repair some of the awful damage that is being made right now. I don't know if anybody could have been prepared for this storm. It came into Cuba as a Category 5. They don't get any stronger than that. It's going to have a devastating impact. We've not heard any statistics yet on fatalities or injuries. I think it's going to take a long time for Cuba to figure out exactly how punishing the storm was.
And again, we've discussed it this morning, the number of people who could evacuate, did evacuate, and how many of those people stayed and just hunkered down in their homes or in safe places across the island.
So usually out there I could point to islands, the Cuban Keys, sort of like the Cuba's version of the Florida Keys, and it's also a very tourist area. We can't see them right now because they are underwater, Victor. The hotels where the tourists were at were completely evacuated. The government came and said nobody can stay here. No foreigners could stay in this part of the coast. We're the only ones that are right here in this town that I'm aware of, because of course we're journalists and we were allowed to. But by and large, they told all tourists to evacuate. They were begging residents here to leave. They were going up and down the street with loudspeakers saying to please get out, to go to shelters, to go to caves in the mountains, to go stay with family. The people we are staying with who hosted us last night and gave us the ability to be here and be someplace safe, they sent the wife and children of this family to go stay with relatives because they knew this was going to be dangerous. I don't think anybody in this town realized quite how dangerous it was going to be, because now, Victor, this town is underwater.
All right, Patrick Ottman for us there. A portion of Cuba there underwater. As the sun comes up, we'll see more of the damage caused by the wind. They are not out of the woods yet. What is in Cuba is headed to South Florida. Let's now go to CNN meteorologist Chad Myers in the Weather Center. Again, we've discussed this morning, Chad, about all of the preparations on the East Coast, and now the West Coast looks like they're going to get a lot of the really bad parts of Irma.
In the overnight hours, the European and the GFS, the American model, did shift a little bit farther to the west, probably 20 miles. That is true. And so did the track somewhere in the lower Keys and then on up toward Cape Coral. But let me show you where the storm is right now. There is Cuba, and there is our Patrick Ottman. This is a 155-mile-per-hour storm. I want you to notice the eye wall. I'm going to get rid of this for a minute and bring up my Google Earth. Our Patrick Ottman is right there. This is Kiberian. Now I'm going to zoom out. You can see exactly where he is. Right there. Where is the eye? Right there. Tell me journalists don't care? I'll show you Patrick Ottman. He is doing a job today. So here we go. Back to this. Zoom in. Show you what's going on. The storm has lost strength overnight because it did hit Cuba. Terrible for Cuba, terrible for the Keys, absolutely no question. But the storm did lose some intensity and lost some pressure. But let me tell you, the pressure of this storm is still lower than Harvey. So even though it doesn't look as impressive on the satellite right now, it is an impressive storm and it is still a major hurricane not to go back to your house with just yet. Here comes your weather, Victor. It is about 8 miles offshore, maybe less. You are right there, Venetian Causeway, and here comes the rain. Rain for you, and every time a rain band comes in, that mixes down the wind with it, and every time it starts to rain, the rain will blow at 50 today. Every time the rain blows this afternoon, it's going to blow at 60. Tonight, 70. Tomorrow, it keeps going, and the max wind in Miami-Dade all the way down toward Kendall, probably somewhere in the 100 to 105 range. So Yes, the storm shifted to the left, but you are not out of anything here in Miami. The big story, I guess, still right this morning is Key West, because you're going to get slammed. And also Cape Coral, Fort Myers, and the like, and Naples and Venice. This is the area today that we're going to take the storm in Cuba where it is and drive it into the Florida Straits, where it is very warm. The water is 87 degrees there. The storm will likely get stronger again, or at least consolidate the eye wall into another 150 to 155 storm, rotate right through Key West, probably Sunset Key and the Dry Tortugas, and then turn right into this beautiful area of southwestern Florida. Regional Southwest is the airport. You're talking all of the cities from Naples to Fort Myers and Cape Coral. You're right under the gun of a major hurricane. And 48 hours ago, you were not. People actually left Miami to go to Naples because they thought they were going to be in good shape. The storm did not cooperate. Let me tell you this. The storm doesn't know that there's a European model. The storm doesn't know that there's an American model. It has a mind of its own. It's its own thing, even though we think we can control it or that we think we can say where it's going to go. We can't. As good as the models are, they're not perfect. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, all the way down to Key West, 5 to 10 foot storm surge. On the other side, 8 to 12 foot storm surge from Naples all the way down to Everglades City. Something else I'm concerned with here, if we fill in the Everglades with a 12-foot storm surge, the wall or the levee on the backside of Miami all the way up to Hialeah and the like, that's not 12 feet tall. There's no way the water is not going to come in and flood Miami, at least parts of it, from the wrong side, from the backside. So we have to watch that. Fort Myers and Tampa, you are also in it. Anywhere that you see the orange and the red, that is going to be a hurricane wind. We're going to have hurricane winds across, obviously, the Keys, clearly into Miami, blowing through Fort Myers, Naples, and Tampa. And some of these areas around Tampa could now pick up about 115 for wind, where yesterday it was 85. That's a difference. And we're still bringing in this wind here on this side. We're still pushing water all along the coast, making coastal flooding all the way from Fort Myers, Fort Lauderdale, all the way around, maybe even toward Charleston. And then eventually the storm gets to Macon, Valdosta, Atlanta. Okay, only 55 to 75 miles per hour. But that's where everybody went. Everybody left Florida to get out into Georgia and the Carolinas, and now the storm's kind of chasing them up there. At least it's dying when it gets there. Back to you.
Hey, Chad, thank you. And as soon as you said, I mean, down to the second, when you said, here comes the rain, we started to feel the first few droplets of that next band that's coming. It's going to be, as we understand, more than we're seeing now. But, Chad, thank you very much. We just spoke with Patrick Hoffman in Cuba. I want to take you back to a shot we have in Cuba. Irma, which hit as a Category 5 with 160-mile-an-hour winds, is now beating down on the island nation of Cuba. Patrick reported just a few moments ago that portions of where he is underwater. The Cuba's version of the Keys now underwater as well. As the sun comes up, we're getting the first look at the damage that those Category 5 strength sustained winds caused in parts of Cuba. And as we go through the morning, we'll show you more of that. But again, what is hitting Cuba now and what hit Cuba overnight is on its way to Florida, the Florida Keys, South Florida, and into an increasing degree, the western coast, the Gulf Coast, the west side of the peninsula will be hit as well. Of course, we have our reporters there across Florida and across the Caribbean. Let's go now to CNN meteorologist Derek Van Dam. He is in Miami Beach. Derek, I wonder if you're getting any of the rain that we're told is just minutes away, and the strength of the storm now downgraded to a 4, but still a very strong Category 4 storm.
Without a doubt, Victor, first glimmer of light here in South Beach, but it is obscured by the monster rain band that's about to pelt us right now. We're feeling some of the outflow boundaries of these feeder bands that are coming in. I got to take you to the shoreline, and then I want to get off this beach as quick as possible. There is a special significant weather advisory in effect for central and southern Miami-Dade County as we speak, and you can see exactly why, because that off in the distance looks very ominous. We've had these feeder bands come in all night long, and they instantly bring the wind speeds up from a gentle gust to a full-on tropical storm force. I would estimate anywhere from 35 to 40 miles per hour as we speak right now. The wind has picked up significantly. and the rain is pelting us as well, and it's also picking up some of the sand here. It is going to be a rough next 45 minutes as this band moves in, and we'll continue to see that move inland as well. We know the threats here: storm surge, 5 to 10 feet, the official forecast for Miami-Dade along the coastline. But this storm is so massive that they're going to feel the effects of Irma all the way inland, even though we know that that track has shifted ever so slightly to the west. We're going to continue to be impacted by hurricane-force winds, especially as we head into the overnight hours again tonight and into early Sunday morning. All right, this is all we've got for right now. I want to get off this beach, Victor, because conditions are deteriorating quickly, and this storm system is really going to pick up quickly. You can see off in the distance some of the horizon being completely obscured by the rain and the wind. And some of the palm trees really taking a beating from this, as winds easily gusting over 40, 45 miles per hour, almost tropical storm force. And I would imagine that this is going to create a bit of a hazard for any of the loose objects out there, maybe some palm branches, some trees starting to break their limbs and their branches, perhaps some electrical failures with this as well. So as this band continues to move in, we're expecting the worst. Victor?
All right, Derek Van Dam for us there at Miami South Beach. Do what you need to do to stay safe. We'll check back throughout the morning. Christy, we're starting to feel what you see hitting Derek there in South Beach here in downtown Miami. We'll send it back to you.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Victor, I think I see it behind you. If you turn around, that looks like some darkness coming in, even as the sun is coming up. I want you to be careful, too. We don't want anything to happen to you. Take it easy.
All right. We're ready. We're ready.
I know you are. I know you are. Listen, it almost looks like our meteorologists make their living tracking dangerous storms out there while other people are getting out. We saw that with Derek just a moment ago, but there are others, the storm chasers, who do the same thing. We're going to talk to one in Miami Beach as Irma is making its way to South Florida. Irma, what you see right there, the size of Texas heading towards Florida. 18 minutes past the hour, and look what is hitting Cuba right now. These are some of the latest pictures we're getting in as they are getting pummeled. Patrick Ottman is there. He says it feels like the wind feels like a jet engine hitting him, and he is on the second story of a building, which is the only reason we're even able to get these pictures to you, because he says everything else is underwater. He is standing on that second level hearing roofs being torn off of buildings. He said that the Cuba Keys, which are equivalent to the Florida Keys as we know them to be, are underwater, and that this is just a punishing storm, as he has defined it there. But those are some of the latest pictures coming in. 160-mile-an-hour winds and a possible 23-foot storm surge, or waves, I should say, 23-foot waves that have already been recorded there in Cuba. And we know back in Florida, some 10,000 power outages already in the southern part of the state there, ahead of Hurricane Irma's expected arrival, which is expected essentially overnight, early tomorrow. Airports in Jacksonville, Tampa say they will end commercial flights at 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. respectively tonight, in preparation for what we just saw in Cuba that is now coming to Florida. This is a Category 4 storm, 155-mile-per-hour winds that is heading to us from Cuba, and Victor is there in Miami and starting to feel it. Victor?
Yeah, Christy, we are starting to feel it. It came in pretty quickly. I want to bring in authorities are saying that the resources around this city are difficult to get to people. FEMA Administrator Craig Fugate, former administrator, spoke to CNN last night. We'll hear that in a moment. But first, let me get to David Halstead, CNN contributor and former director of emergency management here. David, we're starting to feel some of this rain, some of the wind. How long will we feel this before we get to the worst of it?
This is going to be increasing throughout the day, probably by early afternoon. Certainly, you're going to have the stronger winds come on board, and then, of course, tomorrow when the storm strikes. Right now, though, I think as you look around, you see that there's no cars on the roadways. There's no boats in the bays. That's boding well for Miami-Dade, that they've taken and heeded the warning of evacuation very strongly.
What do you make of the sustained strength of this storm? Now a Category 4, but still a very strong 4, and has been around that range for several days now.
Well, if we go back to a couple of historic storms, one, Hurricane Andrew, if you remember, was a tropical storm out no more than 2 days off the coast, strengthened, came in as a 4, and later was upgraded to a 5. Ivan did the same thing going up to the Pensacola and Gulf Shores area in Alabama. It started out as a 2, 3, and next thing you know, it was a 4 as it struck the coast. So storms do that at the last moment. They can strengthen, they can wane, but as Florida's found out, typically they strengthen.
Is this the time for people to be out on roads trying to get to shelters? We've heard from the governor that this is not the time to get onto the highways and head north to, potentially Georgia or other states to head inland. But should they be on the roads at all now?
Anyone certainly south of Florida or south of Orlando, Florida, should not be on the roadways. It's time to get into a shelter, get to a safe place, get with your family, make sure that you got food and water provisions for 3 days, and be prepared to ride out the storm. That's the only smart thing to do at this point. Victor.
What's your message to those people who our Bill Weir has spoken with over the last 24 hours down in the Keys, who are part of, as they call themselves, the Conch Republic, and say that they are hardy people and will stay?
Well, as state director, I was made a member of the Conch Republic, so it's hard for me to criticize them too much. However, the eye of the storm comes over, and it has the storm surge that many of us fear. There could be catastrophic results in deaths, and we don't want that. But it's too late for them to leave now. Get to a shelter, get certainly above ground, second floor if possible, of a building that has been hardened for storms, and we'll just wish them good luck and see them on the other side.
Finally, as we see this gradual slight shift to the west over the last several days in the advisories from the National Hurricane Center, what's your greatest concern for the west coast of Florida?
West coast, again, is flooding. It's low-lying areas. As you know, the Everglades are built here in the southern part of the state, but they lean a little bit more towards the west coast. And as you go up the west coast to Collier and Lee counties, that's where Fort Myers is, those are low areas, and they flood very quickly. So, again, I think flooding is going to be a concern, and our ability to respond in as a state based on the track of the storm, again, is going to be very difficult for people to get in there and help, because the storm is coming almost at the dead center of this part of the state.
All right. David Holstead, thanks you so much for being with us this morning as we continue to prepare for what we're seeing across the Caribbean, would hit Cuba overnight and is now approaching Florida. Coming up, as Hurricane Irma races toward Florida, the Keys, South Florida, and on up the peninsula, officials are warning people to take the evacuation request seriously. One of the big fears, the storm surge. Up next, we'll break down why Irma is so dangerous.
Look at the size of this storm. It is wider than our entire state and could cause major and life-threatening impacts from coast to coast.
I'm not a woman that is frightened, but this is frightening.
People are scared right now after they see what happened in Texas.
I can't even begin to describe the feelings that I'm going through.
Alrighty, I'm Christy Paul, and we are watching this monstrous storm as it makes its way toward the Florida Keys this morning. Chad Myers has been watching it as well. Victor is down in Miami. We're having a problem with his shot because the wind and the rain have started to hit him, as well as Derek Van Dam, who is in Miami Beach right now. And you probably heard him say, not only is the wind hitting me and the rain is pelting me, but the sand is picking up and that's hitting him as well. So they're really starting to feel the first bands of this. But we know that it's hit Cuba. We know that it's been hit hard. There are people, though, Chad, I wanted to ask you, that are up in Florida. They weren't expecting it to be as bad on the west coast as it is. How long, as they start to feel these first effects and say they are sitting in a shelter or they're sitting in their home and they're thinking, how long is this going to last? Can you give them any indication of that?
Well, from eye wall to eye wall, I would say that's 2 hours at this speed. When you first get the worst of it, when you get the 130 going from the east, compared to the eye and it gets calm, to the 130 going from the west, which is the backside of the eye, would be a 2-hour period. You cannot go outside during that period to even check on anything, because the wind will eventually pick up and blow everything that it's already displaced and blow it back on you. So this is a 2-hour process from eye wall to eye wall. But from where we are now to when Miami finally feels less than 50, might be 36 hours. I mean, it's going to blow a long time. This thing's only doing 10 miles an hour now, 12 miles an hour.
And that's part of why it's hitting on Sunday. It's not even getting out of the state of Florida until Tuesday? Is that right? Or late Monday?
That's about how long it would take you 2 days ago to drive out of the state. Because I have a friend who lives in Grassy Key, and his regular home is in Michigan. It took him 20 hours to evacuate from the Middle Keys to Georgia. 20 hours just to get across Florida because of the traffic jams and the lack of gas that they had. They had to wait for tankers to come in to put gas in the gas stations so they could fill up and keep going. That's what that was like to evacuate.
So let's talk about the shift that you've seen in the last several hours. It obviously shifted more to the west than was expected initially. Because of that, any more shifting do you suspect? Or once it turns, you have a pretty good indication, you feel pretty solid about where it's going?
Once it turns. It hasn't turned yet. And we talked about this 5 days ago. This was going to be the storm that we wait for the turn and wait for the turn. When does it go? Is it a wobble or is it a turn? And it hasn't turned yet. So yes, absolutely. This could completely miss Key West altogether and then make a run into Tampa. There's no question, or even like a Charlie that ran into Punta Gorda. Anderson Cooper and I were there, 13 years ago. The place was destroyed by a Category 4 hurricane, and that's what this would be if it does, in fact, make landfall on the West Coast. It is forecast right now to still go through the lower Keys, not quite to Key West, and then on up to Naples, on up into Cape Coral with a Category 4 wind of 140 miles per hour. Now, a lot of those homes were built in the 70s. Some of them are timeshares. They're wooden structures that are not going to hold up in 130 mile per hour wind. They were not built after 1992 when all of a sudden Florida had a brand new code. You should know when your home is built, and if it's not built strongly, you need to get into a shelter here because this is the most dangerous place in Florida right now. This is the most dangerous place to be in Florida other than Key West, and we already know that entire island may get overwashed with water.
Which makes it so hard for the people of Florida because they were expecting an East Coast storm.
Yes.
I know people that left from the East Coast, went to the West Coast thinking that they were going to be safe,
yes,
and now are making their way back to the East Coast, yes, before this thing hits. But you brought up a very good point that I think needs to be mentioned again, and that is the Everglades. Talk to us about your concern there.
Well, the Everglades are not land. Okay, so people say, oh, it's going to hit the Everglades, it'll start to slow down. The Everglades are water, and warm water, warmer than the Florida Keys water. And if you push 12 feet of water into the Everglades, and you fill up the Everglades with water, the backside of Miami isn't 12 feet high. The levees and the ditches that are on the west side of Miami proper, Miami-Dade proper, that is what I believe will flood the wrong direction. It will flood from west to east until you get to 12 feet high, which obviously there are many areas in Miami that are greater than 12 feet above sea level, but that is a real concern for me. Flooding salt water the wrong direction. You expect the water to come from the east.
Right.
You never expect it to come from the west. In Katrina, we expected it to flood New Orleans from the Mississippi River. We never expected it to flood from Lake Pontchartrain, and that's what happened.
And that's what happened. So when you're looking at what's going on in Cuba right now, does that give you any indication as to what is in store for Florida based on the models and what they're projecting at this moment?
Just take a look in this last picture right here. Our Patrick Ottman. Patrick Ottman, right there. He is right in the eye of this storm. But the eye is just beginning to lose contact with Cuba. When that happens, the storm will re-strengthen. The storm died overnight because, or a little bit, because it did hit these Cuban keys that he was talking about, and that took a little stuffing out. Plus, there's a mountain chain right through here that brought in some dry air to the storm. Now that the storm is offshore, now the storm is going to re-strengthen. And I still think a high Cat 4 to maybe a Cat 5 right into the lower keys, maybe the dry Tortugas if Key West gets cleared altogether.
All right, Chad is sticking with us, obviously, to make sure that we understand where this thing's going, what it's, and I know that we have an update coming, I think, from the National Hurricane Center.
We do in 24 minutes. Yeah,
in about 24 minutes, we'll bring that to you as well. We're going to take you back to Cuba and hopefully get Victor back up in Miami and see what they are dealing with there. Do stay close.
We've got pictures coming in from Hollywood, Florida, of the winds from Irma starting to whip up on the beach there on the eastern coast, not too far from Fort Lauderdale. And this, again, is just a taste, a small teaspoon of what is coming with this flood of wind and rain and damage with this monster Category 4 storm. Our shot was down for a moment when we got just the edge of an outer band with the winds and rains here. We obviously have been able to reestablish here in a small moment of calm. We know that more is coming as the eye wall approaches, which will reach Florida early Sunday morning. Now, Florida's governor, mayors across this state are pleading with people who are still in evacuation zones to leave, and leave now. Don't get on the road. Don't try to head to Georgia or head further inland, but get to the closest shelter. Hurricane Irma, with sustained winds at 155 miles an hour, it is heading for Florida, threatening storm surge, heavy rains as we've discussed. Let's go now back to the north coast of Cuba, where our Patrick Ottman has been seeing overnighted into the morning the brunt of this storm. Patrick, how's it now?
13 years ago, Hurricane Charlie ripped through here in
you know, Victor, Irma may be heading towards you in Florida, but she is not done with Cuba yet. We continue to feel these very powerful gusts. They are taking off roofs, they're knocking down trees, and we just continue to feel that the storm is wreaking terrible damage. You know, look over here. This was, until yesterday, last night, the waterfront of the city. Now the ocean has completely taken over the city and flooded about every house in this town. That was the seawall. There are people walking there yesterday. There are cars driving by. It is under, I think some of those waves might be 20 feet high. It's an incredible change in just a day to see what the storm is capable of doing. We are only able to be broadcasting where we are, Victor, because we are on the second story of a very well-built house, one of the highest buildings in this small town. But even where we are, it's under threat. The water is about 6 feet high. We have another 4 or 5 feet to go before the water gets up here. Obviously, there is no power, so we're using a generator. We have limited gasoline. Our car is parked miles away, so we will continue to bring you reports for as long as we can, because as you can see, the situation here in this part of Cuba is absolutely catastrophic, Victor.
All right, Patrick Ottman there for us on the north coast of Cuba. We'll check back. Patrick, thank you so much and stay safe. Christy, I'm going to send it back to you. Again, we have just a moment of calm here, but we know that more of those outer bands, as Irma approaches, will be hitting us in the next few hours.
And we are wishing you and the crew their safety for sure, Victor. Thank you so much, as Victor's going to be with us all morning long, all day long, really. One of the things we talk about the flooding, we talk about the winds. What about post-hurricane and the need for blood donations? The need is urgent right now, and we're going to have that conversation in just a moment.
Welcome back to CNN's continuing live coverage of Hurricane Irma, now a Category 4 storm. It is expected to hit the Keys in South Florida early Sunday morning. Now, as we've said this morning, there are millions of people who have been ordered to evacuate. Almost 5.6 million, could be the largest mass evacuation in U.S. history. And already more than 7,000 people have seen power outages in South Florida. That number down from 10,000. Officials say that outages could last several days, several weeks in some areas. So take that into consideration. If you're staying in these evacuation areas, you may be without power for weeks. Another element we need to consider here, the blood supply. There will unfortunately be injuries. People rush to hospitals once first responders can get to them. The supplier for the Southeast is called One Blood. Its officials are urging people to donate. They urged before the storm, because right now their donation centers, understandably, are closed. Joining me now, One Blood's Vice President of Marketing Communications, Susan Forbes. Susan, good to see you. We saw each other last in Orlando after the terrible shooting at the Pulse nightclub, and what you told me then was the importance of having a ready blood supply before an emergency. First, talk to me about if the centers across Florida, the 200 hospitals that are serviced, have what they need at the start.
I can assure you that our hospital partners have the necessary blood on hand. And you're right, it's a need for a ready blood supply in advance of the storm, in advance of any type of tragedy. The blood has to be there. So the Blood Center has been very, very busy at One Blood behind the scenes, really for the past week, preparing for this storm. As soon as we had an inkling of an idea that this could be headed our way, the preparations begin. So donors had to come in before the storm. We have to get the blood to the hospitals and actually get extra blood to them so that they have it on hand to ride out the storm, because we're not able to deliver blood to them when the hurricane is hitting.
We've got power.
So let me ask you this, as people are sent to hospitals, and the unfortunate reality is that there will be people because of this storm who are rushed in and will need transfusions, how will One Blood be able to get the blood to them in the storm, or is that something that has not yet been determined if their reserves right now aren't enough?
Well, like I said, we made sure that our hospital partners have the necessary blood on hand. We have been shipping blood and delivering blood to them in the past several days so that they have extra on hand, more than they normally would have to ride out the weekend. So we feel very confident that they have what they need on hand. And then as soon as the storm starts to lift in certain areas and it's safe for us to able to go back out, we will begin to deliver additional supplies to them as they need it. So, but this really, shows the importance of a ready blood supply in advance of a storm. It's important to have a ready blood supply every day of the year, but it's heightened when you see a Category 5 headed toward your state. So this is why we encourage donations beforehand, so that we have what's needed for these hospitals in advance, and it's in their hospitals right now.
But there's 10, 15 feet.
All right, Susan Forbes with One Blood. The folks over there, you guys do an amazing job. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, and I'll check in after the storm passes. Again, thanks so much. Now, in about an hour, more shelters were open in Fort Myers. We're talking West Coast now, Florida, for those who are seeking to escape the hurricane's path, as we've seen that general kind of gradual shift of the center of this cone moving to the west. And it's less of a cone now as it gets so close to Florida. Some of the people who live there in Fort Myers slept in the streets overnight, hoping to guarantee a spot. Cars parked outside of these shelters. CNN's Drew Griffin is in Fort Myers. Drew, good morning to you. What are you seeing, and how many people are we talking about waiting to get into these shelters?
We just weren't coming up with.
Well, I don't have an exact number, Victor, but many of the shelters filled up quickly, both here in Lee County, Fort Myers, where I'm standing right now, and down in Naples, Collier County, when that shift to the west took place. For a long time, the folks here on the west side thought this was going to be more of a Miami event, maybe going up the East Coast. But when Irma made that jog, or was potentially going to make that jog towards the west, it got real serious. The counties distributed their Level A mandatory evacuation. Those evacuations are all based on potential storm surge. So you had all the barrier islands, Marco Island, Pine Island, Sanibel, Captiva, all of those under mandatory evacuation. Parts of cities like Cape Coral across the Calahoosahatchee River, where I'm standing right now, under mandatory evacuation. And for wind, all mobile home parks advised to evacuate. So the shelters filled up quickly. They're adding more shelters today, as you said. Some are opening up within the hour. 3 more will open at 10 a.m. today. So continually we see people taking the threat seriously, evacuating. I don't see any signs of panic. There's a lot of preparation going on, and it looks like everybody who wants shelter will be able to get into a shelter, even though they may have to wait in line this morning, Victor.
All right, Drew Griffin for us there in Fort Myers. Drew, thank you so much. The wind is picking up here again. And again, Hurricane Irma is going to be here landfall when that eye is over land here. Expected to hit the Keys very early Sunday, but you're going to see these gusts of stronger winds as we get closer to that hour. Our special live coverage of Hurricane Irma continues. Stay with us.
Look at the size of this storm. It is wider than our entire state and could cause major and life-threatening impacts from coast to coast.
I'm not a woman that is frightened, but this is frightening.
People are scared right now. after they see what happened in Texas.
I can't even begin to describe the feelings that I'm going through.
Welcome back to our live coverage of Hurricane Irma. This hurricane, the storm, is the size of Texas, if that gives you any indication of what we're dealing with. And Victor Blackwell is in Miami as the first bands of this storm are coming their way. And Victor, we've been watching you and the evolution of this storm. It started, you had your hat was off, looked like things were clear. Help us understand what it's been like there for you the last 3 hours.
Yeah, when we started at 5 Eastern, the jacket was too much. It was just windy, but the first edges of those outer bands have now started to come on, and those gusts that we felt in the 5 o'clock hour became sustained in the 6 o'clock hour, and the gusts we felt at 6 are now sustained in the 7 o'clock hour, and it will continue to deteriorate until we start to see some of those heavier rains, the heavier bands come, and then landfall in the Keys and in South Florida at some point in the early hours on Sunday. You know, I lived here, Christy, you know this, for 7 years before I moved to Atlanta and joined CNN, and this is more than people who have lived here their entire lives have ever seen. If you think back to the storms of 2004 and Charlie and Francis and Ivan and Jean, that's nothing compared to this. Andrew, 2 of those from 1992 can fit into this storm. Craig Fugate, who used to run emergency management here, says that Florida hasn't seen a storm like this since the 1920s. So people who say, I lived through Andrew, you haven't lived through anything compared to what Irma is bringing in the next few hours. Christy?
Isn't that the truth? All right, Victor staying with us, obviously, bringing us the very latest as the next hour of New Day starts right now for you.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And if you are just joining us, thank you so much for being with us. I'm Christy Paul here in Atlanta. We appreciate your company. Victor Blackwell is in the thick of it in Miami this morning. Hurricane Irma taking its first swipes at Florida. Victor, good morning to you and the crew. How you doing?
We're good. We're good. A little windy, a little rainy, but compared to what's coming to Florida, this is crystal clear, perfect weather, because it's going to get really bad. It's going to happen quickly. The breaking news this morning, very powerful Category 4 hurricane on a new track this morning, and it's headed this way. Of course, we're talking Irma. This deadly storm is forecast to make landfall over the Florida Keys sometime in the early hours on Sunday. The latest track now puts the west coast of Florida in line for much of what the worst of Irma will bring. We're talking from Fort Myers through Sarasota, St. Petersburg, Tampa as well. Florida's governor, the mayors across this state are pleading with people who are still in evacuation zones, those mandatory evacuation zones, to get out and get out now. Hundreds of people, thousands of people across the state, in fact, have headed to county shelters, and some people spent the night on the West Coast sleeping in their cars on the side of the road, waiting to get into a shelter, because this is what is coming. Look at this. Irma beating up on Cuba. There are, feet of water in some places. That's not an exaggeration considering what our Patrick Ottman, who's there on the North Coast, has been showing us. 160-mile-an-hour winds broke the equipment there that records the wind speed on the island. Now, you know, we are tracking Irma across Florida. We've got reporters live from Miami Beach to Key Largo, Fort Myers, all across the Caribbean as well. Let's go first, though, with the National Hurricane Center, that updated advisory on the strength and the track of Irma. And let's go to Chad Myers in the Weather Center. The changes we've seen overnight, because a lot of people went to sleep and it was a Category 5, and it was moving toward the West Coast. We've seen some changes overnight. Chad, get us all up to date.
Victor, the storm made contact with Cuba overnight, and that's the biggest change to anything here. The new models coming out later this morning will have to deal with a Category 4, but only 130 miles per hour compared to 155, which was the number at 5 o'clock this morning. So things have really improved for the U.S. They have not improved for Cuba. The northern coast of Cuba getting pounded by this storm. Also the Cuban Keys right through here. And our Patrick Ottman, which is right there in the eye wall, picking up those winds of 130. The radar now picking up the storm. It is raining in Key West all the way up, even to Key Largo and into Miami. We're going to see that rain continue across the Everglades. It's going to be a little bit hard still to get out of Miami today, but the roads are clear. I just checked traffic. There's a lot less traffic today than there's been the past couple of days. Forecast is still for this to regain strength. The pressure is still lower than the pressure of Harvey. And that's what we saw in Texas, of course. We talk about the storm paralleling the coast of West Coast Florida and how the East Coast is not as in big trouble. But you know what? This is the bad side of the storm. We call that the dirty side of the storm. We have to add the movement of the storm with the wind field, and so as the winds pour on shore here, you're not out of the woods by any means. Ocala, Leesburg, all the way up the East Coast, from Port Jupiter to anywhere to Daytona Beach, all the way down south into Miami, because you're on the wrong side. You're on the bad side of the storm, also causing significant storm surge. Now, let me just use a different term. Flooding. Do you get that? Storm surge is water that will kill you. It is water that is 8 to 12 feet above sea level, and your house, if you live near the ocean, is not. That's what storm surge is. It is the push of the water, the pull of the water by the low and the difference in pressure, and as it pushes on shore, that water will get into the Everglades, it will get to you, Naples, and it will get to you, Fort Myers. And yes, we are concerned about your storm surge because the fatalities in water are greater than the fatalities in wind. Dr. Michael Brennan from the National Hurricane Center joins me now. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you guys are busy down there. Talk us through the 8 a.m. update.
Sure. Well, you can see the eye of Irma here on the radar from Key West. Its eye skirting the north coast of Cuba. That interaction with land has brought the peak winds down a little bit, but I don't want people to focus on that because the hazards from Irma are just now arriving through the Florida Keys and South Florida. These outer rain bands are beginning to arrive, so conditions are deteriorating now, and we expect Irma to re-strengthen as it moves out over these very warm waters in the Florida Straits. It's going to have about 12 or maybe even 18 hours over the water before it reaches the Keys, and then perhaps even a little more time over water after it passes the Keys before it finally moves inland somewhere along the west coast of Florida during the late in the day on Sunday or Sunday night. So a very dangerous situation, particularly for the Keys and for the Florida west coast, all the way from the Tampa Bay area southward to Naples. They could see the core of the major hurricane, and as you were just talking about, that life-threatening storm surge. The Gulf Coast of Florida is particularly sensitive to storm surge, and very high inundation values that can extend quite a ways inland. So that's a big concern of ours today.
The topography of the water across southwest Florida, the bathymetry or underwater topography, is different on the southwest side and on the east side. Tell us about how that will affect surge even into the Everglades, Doctor.
Right, yes. The bathymetry and the coastal shelf on the Gulf side is very shallow. So as you walk out into the water, the water doesn't get deep very fast. So all that water that's being pushed by the hurricane, so as Irma might come up like this, the northwesterly winds on the back side of it are going to drive that water, and it piles up, and it can go really far inland here in the Naples area. It can go up these rivers and creeks near Fort Myers and up into the bays. So it can affect millions of people are at risk of life-threatening storm surge in these areas. There still is a significant storm surge risk on the southeast coast as well, particularly in Miami-Dade County along the west side of Biscayne Bay, and as well as in the Florida Keys. They're all at risk of this life-threatening surge event.
Let's shift our attention from Boca down to Miami and even to Homestead. What are the new updates for that as the storm has, let's say, shifted 20 miles to the west? What are your thought processes there?
Well, the surge threat is still there. We can still see 5 to 10 feet of inundation all the way from Boca down around the southwest southern tip of the peninsula. Now, on the east coast, as you mentioned, the storm surge threat doesn't extend as far inland, especially in Palm Beach and Broward counties, but here in Miami-Dade, it goes inland a lot farther along Biscayne Bay, so there's lots of people at risk that have been asked to evacuate for storm surge. And that storm surge threat is going to creep northward along the coast of the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast of Florida as we go through Sunday and even into Monday.
I have not many seconds left. I am a little bit concerned, Doctor, that we flood the Everglades with 12 feet of water, and Miami, let's say West Kendall, can flood from the back side. Are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there is the potential for that. That's generally for a slower moving storm that would be a biggest threat for that type of flooding. But there's going to be a lot of water with this storm. There's going to be a lot of rainfall, so there's going to be a lot of flooding problems just in general in the Florida Peninsula, either from storm surge and or the combination of very heavy rain. So everybody's going to want to keep an eye out for that.
Thank you, Doctor. Also, some displaced livestock, displaced wildlife. In particular, alligators that I'm a little bit worried about, but I don't like wildlife anyway. Doctor, thank you very much. We'll talk to you at 11 o'clock. People, this is the real deal. This truly is. If you are in Key West, you need to go. This could be a 140-mile-per-hour storm knocking down the entire city. I was married there. I love Key West. I love how it looks. But this is the real deal. Victor?
Here's the sheriff. Yeah, Chad, they're echoing what we heard from the National Weather Service out of the Keys, that this is as real as it gets. So take all of these warnings seriously. Chad Myers and the CNN Weather Center, thank you so much. We've got some live pictures coming in here from Orlando, as again, what is hitting South Florida in a few hours will be hitting Central Florida later in the day on Sunday. So we're seeing a water distribution center here. There have been difficulties getting bottled water across the state, and we know that this is one of the options here for people who are trying to get some water up in Orlando. Thanks to our affiliates for bringing us that. Let's now go to Cuba, which is bearing the brunt of Hurricane Irma, has overnight. CNN's Patrick Oppman is there on the north coast. Patrick, I want you to give us an update on what you're seeing there, but also leaning on your years of living in Cuba, being based there, your fears for the island, considering the conditions you're seeing as Irma passes.
So you're going to have a lot of water moving into the area. That is why,
it's really just astounding as the light comes up and you see the damage where we are. And this was a very concerning hurricane because I've covered a number here, and Cuba always seems to miss the bullet somewhat. They got it smacked dead on last night, and the effects are being felt as far away as Havana and throughout the island until the waters recede, because right now we're on the second floor of a house. We're at about 5-6 feet of water. Most of the houses in this town, in this region, are single-story houses, sometimes with wooden roofs, sometimes, sorry, just getting another wind gust in here. It's not done with this yet, but some of the houses you see look like they're going to fall over on a good day. I don't know how they survived. If we had stayed on the first floor last night, we would have drowned. Most of the people who were staying in this town who did not evacuate lived on the first floor of their homes. I don't know how they survived the night, frankly. And I know people told me that they were going to stay. I just have to think they regretted that decision. Very few people expected that Cuba was going to get the beating that it took. But you look around this town, most of it is underwater. There are trees down. We continue to see pieces of roofs fly off as the wind picks up. So a very distressing scene, but we won't have the full picture probably for several days until the waters go down and people come out to see their homes. The family who hosted us here last night, I'll tell you, when they came out a little while ago, they had tears in their eyes. They're looking around at their home, their town, the place that they've known their whole lives, and it is just a tragic scene.
When the wind event is over, we haven't seen.
All right, as the sun comes up, Patrick Oppman, thank you so much. We'll see more of the damage that's caused there, and hopefully it's nothing like what we saw across the eastern section of the Caribbean. Patrick Oppman, again, thank you so much. Let's go down to meteorologist Derek Van Dam. He's in Miami Beach. With more on the specific threat from Irma and what it poses to the Keys. And Derek, the last time I saw you, it was getting pretty dangerous there out on the beach. The wind really picking up there. What are conditions like where you are now?
Steady rain as we're beginning to be hit
Well, they continue to deteriorate, as one would imagine. You described it really well at the top of the hour, how each hour, as we stand out in these conditions, the winds become stronger and sustained for longer. We get these feeder bands that come in. The conditions deteriorate in a matter of seconds. Right now, we are on the South Beach, and if you've been in the South Beach on a Saturday morning, you know that this beach would be crowded, but I've got the pick of the litter here. No one to talk to because everyone has heeded the warnings to evacuate. The National Weather Service just tweeted from the Miami Bureau that the International Airport here had an official wind gust of 58 miles per hour. Where I'm standing, we're averaging about 35 to 40 miles per hour. It's picking up sand and pelting us in the face. It's also getting a bit tricky to stand because the wind can be so gusty at times and really take your body along with it. I want to show you just quickly because I want to shelter our camera from the storm that continues to come in. But look to the shore here. You can see that this water is really starting to pick up. Waves earlier were about 1 to 3 feet. Now I would say anywhere from 3 to upwards of 5 feet. And the surge is definitely starting to press in. So I would say the National Hurricane Center still their inundation forecasts of 5 to 10 feet spot on because we are getting that push of Atlantic water starting to move in as the eye wall approaches closer and closer to us here. There was a significant weather advisory for central and southern Miami-Dade County. The winds picking up to tropical storm force winds officially. That means any of these palm trees with coconuts or perhaps their palm leaves could be flying debris. That could also mean life-threatening conditions as some of that debris makes its way down, let's say, Ocean Drive, for instance. Fortunately, everyone's heeded the warning to evacuate, and really, there is just no one out right now with the exception of my team and I. Victor?
All right, Derek Van Dam there for us in South Beach in Miami. Derek, thank you so much. Stand by. We'll get back to you a little later this morning. I want to go now to the mayor of Naples out on the West Coast, Bill Barnett. Mr. Mayor, thanks for making time for us. Increasingly, with the advisories we've seen from the National Hurricane Center about the path of this storm have crept west, now putting your city and your constituents in greater danger. How are you preparing?
Well, thank you, Victor, and good morning. We are about as prepared as we can possibly be, and we've been doing that now for probably the last 6 days. Our emergency first responders, emergency services, all our city staff, we're hunkered down and we're watching and we're waiting. I think that it certainly is not a concern of mine of whether the city has done their preparation, as well as the county, as well as Collier County. So for that aspect, fine. What we're going to get, you know as well as I do, and I'm watching you. I've been watching the network, and Cuba has certainly slowed it down, and I feel bad for those poor folks. But we'll just as this wears on, we'll be better prepared to give you right up to the minute update.
So let's talk about evacuations. Are there mandatory evacuations there in your city, and how many people, rough estimate, are heeding those or deciding to stay exactly where they are?
Well, thank you for that question. They have been evacuated. We are under mandatory evacuation as of yesterday at 2 p.m., but I will tell you that the residents of the city of Naples pretty much listened to what I was saying and others were saying early in the week, and many of them have evacuated. The town is very, very quiet, and I will tell you, because we are seasonal, many of our winter residents are gone anyway. They don't normally come back till October or November. So the attitude here was, especially after Harvey, was they took this very, very seriously, and they did evacuate. And so you don't. From my understanding, as someone that I just spoke to that was just on the road on I-75, said there's very little traffic this morning. So I think that was a good thing, and getting that warning out early worked very well.
Absolutely. Mayor Barnett of Naples, Florida, thank you so much for being with us. We'll check back throughout the day, and you, sir, stay safe.
15 feet of storm surge.
The mayor makes a good point there that much of South Florida is seasonal. The hundreds of thousands of people who come down for vacations or potentially have homes here, their season typically is Thanksgiving to Easter, roughly. So many of those people are not here. There are lots of people who live here. The truth is, though, the residents here, many of them have never lived through a storm like Irma. What is coming here? We'll take a quick break, and our special live coverage of Hurricane Irma will continue in a moment.
Some of those tornado warnings.
Welcome back. I'm Victor Blackwell in Miami, and Florida Governor Rick Scott has one message for the people who are ordered to evacuate the state of Florida. Leave now. That warning is coming as Hurricane Irma bears down on the Florida Keys very soon, where it's expected to arrive early tomorrow morning. Florida officials going door to door in some communities to spread the word. It's more than 5 million people have been urged to get out of the way of this storm. The Category 4 storm now just over 200 miles from Miami and showing no signs of slowing down. Our meteorologist Chad Myers says it's expected that it could strengthen over the next few hours. 23-foot waves were recorded on the northern part of Cuba overnight. And the National Hurricane Center says that Irma will gain strength once it moves away from Cuba. Let's go to Bill Weir. He's south of Miami on Key Largo, one of the first stops on US 1 if you're headed all the way to Key West. What are you seeing there, and are people heeding the warning, the guidance that we saw from the National Weather Service there in the Keys that this is as real as it gets? Get out of the Keys.
Victor, let me tell you, I think that message finally cracked some of those hardened conch skulls down here. This place is famous for being stubborn and being independent. I was here for Wilma. I saw how many people wrote it out then. And just earlier in this week, we saw people who are committed not only to ride it out, some on their boats. It's amazing how those attitudes have changed as the picture of this buzzsaw in the sky has gotten bigger and moved towards the Keys. Yeah, we're here at Snapper's Bar. If you've been watching our coverage for the last couple days, you saw us here Thursday night with a bunch of hurricane partiers, and they were raising their rum punch and making fun of premature evacuators. Well, a lot of those people have evacuated themselves now. The captain of that boat, the salt shaker who said he was going to ride it out aboard his 50-foot sailboat, he jumped ship. He headed north as well. What's really interesting is down in Monroe County, the county seat there of the lower Keys, they had an emergency managers meeting last night. They were telling us all day yesterday that the Category 5 rated jail in Monroe County would be safe, and the 500 prisoners housed there would ride out the storm. But then last night, that all changed. They frantically had to move about 500 prisoners on a caravan of buses with sheriff deputies. We saw the whole convoy of cruisers screaming down Highway 1 to go pick up those prisoners and get them out. So there is a marked shift in attitude down here. No telling how many will end up riding it out. Maybe a quarter of the 75,000 or so who call the Keys home are here. You know, Key West has a rather sizable homeless population as well. But it brings to mind, Victor, the old Big Bad Wolf story and the Three Little Pigs. How the two that lived in the house made of straw and sticks ended up banging on the door of the guy who lives in the brick house. I think that's happening all over the Keys overnight and this morning as the Big Bad Wolf that is Irma blows ashore here.
And you still have that option.
All right, and it is coming. Bill Weir for us there in Key Largo. And again, from the National Weather Service out of the Keys, telling everyone that no one on the Keys will be safe. They are very cautious about hyperbole because they want to make sure that when they offer a warning like that, that people take heed. We'll take a quick break. Our live special coverage of Hurricane Irma continues. Welcome back to CNN's continuing live coverage of Hurricane Irma, now headed to South Florida. Joining me now, Philip Levine, the mayor of Miami Beach. Mr. Mayor, thanks for making time this morning. Since after Harvey, the models have shown that this was initially headed toward Miami, the southeastern section of Florida, and now some of those tracks, some of those advisories show that the West Coast will be getting much of the worst of it. What do you want to say to people who believe that there is some comfort in that new adjusted track?
Well, most important thing is that all these models have been very unpredictable. Things can turn on a dime. So I'm telling all our residents of Miami Beach, stay inside, stay buttoned down, don't go outside, because this thing can turn. The winds are picking up. You can see them right now. There's debris that flies around. And more importantly, we're very concerned about tidal surge, storm surge. That's something which is a primary concern for us. And of course, I'm also thinking about the west coast of Florida. Very concerning. Our thoughts and our prayers are with them if the track does in fact take it up there.
You have assigned this storm a striking moniker in calling it a nuclear hurricane. Why?
Because it's so powerful, it's so large, twice the size of Andrew, larger than the state of Florida. We've seen the destruction of what it's done in the Caribbean, and we hope to God that it does not do the same destruction in Florida. We're ready to go here in Miami and Miami Beach, but once again, as I tell everyone, stay inside. We are far from being out of the woods. This can move, the winds are strong, but we're going to get outer bands, we're going to get significant hurricane strength winds. You do not want to be outside.
Miami Beach under a mandatory evacuation, no shelters on the island. How many people are heeding that? Are you still seeing people who are deciding to stay anyway?
Absolutely. It's amazing though. Everyone's almost gone. The streets were deserted as of yesterday. It became a ghost town. I never thought I would be happy to see Miami Beach as a ghost town, but it is and it was, and we have to keep everybody inside. We've been driving around looking at what's going on, and of course it's very empty because the weather's getting pretty ferocious out here. But once again, my message is please stay inside, please stay safe.
You know, I typically would ask what keeps you up at night, but on this night, everybody will be awake as this storm comes ashore. But what's your greatest concern for the people of Miami Beach as Irma gets closer?
Well, really, one of our greatest storms, it's really about the storm surge, the flooding. Miami Beach is prone to flooding. And when you have this type of a hurricane pushing that kind of water that would go towards us, it's very concerning. That does a lot of damage and it's a lot of disruption. So we're hoping that doesn't happen.
All right, the mayor of Miami Beach, Philip Levine, thanks so much. I know you got a lot to do today. Thanks for making some time for a new day. Chad, I want to toss it back to you in the CNN Severe Weather Center. We're starting to feel those winds really pick up here. But again, I'm telling everybody, although they're seeing us kind of lean into the wind, that this is nothing compared to what we're going to see.
Absolutely not. And the winds are from the east, the wrong direction, blowing the water into Biscayne Bay and up the intercoastal. And our Victor Blackwell right there. But look, I want you to look at the blue. I want you to look at the blue area that I've painted in here. This is what happens with a 6-foot storm surge through Miami. You say, well, it could be more than that. Sure, yes, it could. But let's just go 6 just to say that, because it's easy to put 2 meters in my computer here. Look at all of this. Look at all the downtown that is completely wet. The people that think they're going to ride it out in skyscrapers are going to have their elevator shafts completely wet, not being able to get up and down from their building and be cut off and likely probably have no power. And that's if you just get missed compared to where we're seeing right now, because really Miami is a slight miss as the storm is going to the west. As the storm has moved to the west in the overnight hours, we did see a slight shift to about Key West to Naples. And now Naples, you are really in the middle of what should be the eye wall in 24 to 36 hours. The eye wall is still over Cuba. It lost a lot of intensity overnight. The wind is now 130, but don't take your eye off the ball here. This is still a very big storm, and it's forecast to get back into warm water and likely get back up to a Category 5 before making landfall, pushing water over Cudjoe Key, Summerland Key, Big Pine Key, Key West itself, and then on up into the Florida Bay area, either Everglades City, possibly to Naples or Cape Coral. That's the area that we're really watching here. Farther to the north, Tampa, you are now closer to the eye than you were yesterday, or the center. There may not be an eye by that time, but Orlando, you're going to pick up 100 to 115, and even toward Tampa, likely 95 to 100 miles per hour. Now, there are bigger buildings in Florida than you might expect, because they don't build on sand, they build on coral. They go down and they get some bedrock. And so there are many big buildings in Florida, especially in Miami. 70 over 40 stories tall. If the wind is 145, then all of a sudden you're 174 or almost to 190. So let's reduce this because the storm is slightly farther away. If you're 100 miles an hour at the surface, you'd be 120, 30 stories up, and you'd be probably closer to 150. Another almost category higher due to the fact that there's no friction up above and the wind blows any way that it wants to up there and blows through those buildings. Most of those windows are hurricane rated. What does that mean when the building's not finished? And there are so many buildings in the Miami area that still have towers, still have cranes, still have some windows in, some windows out. There you go, Key West. You are in 100 miles per hour or more. Naples, Fort Myers, Sarasota, same story. And even into Key West, from all the way to Key West to Tampa, could be still a hurricane, Cat 1 or Cat 2, all the way up into central or northern Florida. Winds in Atlanta, probably 60 or 70. Wow. Crazy storm. Back to you guys.
All right, Chad Myers for us in the CNN Severe Weather Center. We just got an update. Governor Rick Scott will be holding an update, a press conference at the top of the hour on the latest on preparations for this monster storm, Hurricane Irma. Of course, we will bring that to you in just about 20 to 25 minutes. Again, Governor Rick Scott updating the state of Florida on preparations for this major storm that will make landfall sometime in the early hours of Sunday. And after the break, we'll talk with the mayor of South Miami about what's being done to protect the power plants there. Quick break. Our special live coverage of Hurricane Irma continues. Welcome back. Live pictures here from Altamont Springs in Central Florida, a suburb of the Orlando area, where people are now at a local hardware store buying plywood, trying to board up their houses. Many people here in South Florida have hurricane shutters that they can put up over their windows. In Central Florida, some of those still, but plywood here, the hot commodity at this local hardware store, preparing in just the hours before first landfall here in Florida, hitting the Keys first in just the next several hours in the early Sunday morning hours. Let's go now to some of the evacuation orders and evacuation zones that we've seen that are really just emptying across the state. Florida Governor Rick Scott has told people to leave now, head to those shelters. We are expecting the governor to hold a news conference on Hurricane Irma at the top of the hour, so about 15 to 20 minutes away. Of course, we will bring that to you live. Irma is now a Category 4 storm heading for Florida. The storm surge, one of the greater threats of this storm. Heavy rains coming, the winds, of course, as you know. And in a little more than an hour, more shelters were open in Fort Myers on the west coast of Florida for those who want to escape the path of this storm. Some of the people who live there slept in the streets, slept in their cars overnight, some of them hoping to get a spot in one of those shelters. CNN's Drew Griffin is in Fort Myers for us. Drew, good morning to you. And for days now, the entire peninsula has known that they will face some threat from Irma, but increasingly the threat to the west coast has become more and more clear.
Yeah, and it became very serious yesterday, which is why you're seeing those lines for the shelters, Victor. What happened is the shelters opened up yesterday. Mandatory evacuations were announced for what they call the Level A evacuations. That's all the barrier islands and the low-lying areas that are susceptible to storm surge. The shelters filled up. So overnight, more people thought, wow, we've got to find shelter. This is really getting serious now. And those people went to shelters that were full. So they had to find the next shelter open. The next shelter open will be at 10 o'clock this morning. There's several others that are going to be open. They are opening shelters, but there is some level of frustration that people are going to shelters that are full and having to drive elsewhere. That is just a little bit of hiccup in what seems to be a pretty good evacuation that's going on here along the southwest coast. We were in Naples last night, virtually a ghost town. I was on I-75 this morning driving north. Roads are empty. A couple of gas stations open with gas, but mostly there's just nobody out on the street. And it's all, Victor, about the storm surge, whether or not Irma is going to churn up 3, 6, 9, 12 feet of water, not only on the coast but inland on these waterways that are just prevalent throughout southwest Florida. So we're watching that closely as these more and more shelters open and more people heed the warnings to do exactly what their governor is telling them to do, which is to get out. Victor?
Yeah, Drew Griffin for us on the West Coast there in Fort Myers. Florida is a very flat state, and people build right to the edge to get as much of that beautiful intracoastal and coastal view as possible. Again, thanks to Drew. Now, we're just a few hours away from a curfew that goes into effect for all of Palm Beach County. We're back now on the east coast of Florida. Anyone still in the area must be off the streets by 3 o'clock this afternoon. Let's head about an hour's drive from where I am now up to Brian Todd, who's in West Palm Beach. And Brian, let us know how else the county is preparing. We saw those police officers out telling everybody that it's time to evacuate yesterday about this time and in the afternoon hours as well.
That's right, Victor. They were out telling people to get out then. They want people out now. We saw a lot of police officers patrolling this morning. They want people off the roads right now. They don't want them out. They've told us that at some point, as the dynamics of this storm start to deteriorate in this area, they're going to shut down these bridges like this one that connect West Palm Beach to Palm Beach. The couple of significant threats that they're monitoring here, Victor, storm surge is one of them. We've heard Chad and our other experts tell us that 5 to 12 feet of storm surge is possible. We're right now at low tide right here by the Intercoastal Waterway. So when the tide rises and then you get 5 to 12 feet, this place could be inundated. Palm Beach across the way could be inundated. That's one threat. Another threat here, construction sites like this one in Cranes. We talked about the Miami cranes and how they've had to be secured. Well, look at this. This is a very large crane here along the coastline in West Palm Beach at a construction site. This building is about 14 stories high. The crane extends far above that. Now, if you see that a little bit over halfway up, they have secured that crane with a large metal brace. Is that going to be enough to keep it in place when this storm really hits in earnest tomorrow, when this place is getting really the strongest wind surge and storm surge? We're going to see about that. Now, like in Miami, we believe that these cranes, the very tops of them, are going to be allowed to kind of swing around in the wind like a large weather vane so that they don't meet resistance and fall over. But then, you know, again, the debris from this site is also going to be a significant threat. So we're going to be monitoring all that as the storm gets closer and the winds pick up here. Victor?
All right, Brian Todd, thanks so much from West Palm Beach. We'll take a quick break and our live special coverage of Hurricane Irma, now just hours away from making landfall in the Florida Keys. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Victor Blackwell. This just in from Monroe County. Their Emergency Operations Center is going to evacuate their southern post in along Marathon Key. They say it is just too dangerous. They're going to be heading about 40 miles up US 1 to Key Largo, where they believe it will be a little more safe for their employees. But again, in Monroe County, which covers most of the Keys there, says that they cannot stay there on the southern end of the Keys, the southwest portion of that county. They'll be heading north to Key Largo so that they'll be able to keep a better eye on the storm. Now let's talk about the path and some really bad news for one city on the west coast of Florida. We have on the phone with us Mayor of Fort Myers, Randall Henderson Jr. Mr. Mayor, good morning to you. When we went to bed, all of us last night, this was a Category 5 storm. It had crept a bit west, but now you are in the center of this cone. What are your thoughts and preps as Irma approaches Florida?
Our primary focus right at the moment is the preservation of life. This is a worst-case scenario for our city and our region. We're taking it very seriously. We are prepared for it. We have opened up additional shelters for those who need to continue to evacuate. There's still time to do that, and we are providing public transportation for them. Our citizens should dial 211 to take advantage of that, but we are fully engaged.
So we know that the West Coast, like the rest of Florida, because of the size of this storm, has been preparing for several days. We just had Mayor Barnett of Naples on a few moments ago saying that they've been preparing as well. But as this has shifted overnight to put Fort Myers more into the center. Are the people of Fort Myers taking it as seriously as you and your employees there in the city are taking this?
I am happy to report to you that our citizens have taken this from the get-go very serious. They continue to take it serious. It's a source of inspiration for me personally that the public servants are working feverishly to preserve life, and that's from Washington all the way down. Francis Rooney, Marco Rubio, Governor Scott, Senator Benaquisto, you name it, we're engaged, including the president, and we are executing on our plan.
What's your greatest concern now that you're seeing just how great the threat is to Fort Myers?
We are watching the storm surge very closely. We know that water can kill people, and we know that the winds are going to be sustained for long periods of time, with the potential for them to be well over 100 miles an hour, and that's destructive. People need to be in fortified facilities, and they need to be out of the floodplain.
Yeah, you make a good point there that the storm surge is the great danger. The drowning deaths are certainly some of the greatest threats as these storms come ashore, more than most others. Mayor Henderson Jr., thank you so much for being with us this morning. And you and the folks there in Fort Myers, stay safe for us.
Thank you, sir.
All right, coming up in just a few minutes, we're expecting to hear the latest on preparations for Hurricane Irma. Florida Governor Rick Scott will be holding a news conference at the top of the hour, and we will bring you that live when it happens. Christy, back to you in Atlanta.
Yeah, 5.6 million people already under those orders to evacuate, millions more taking shelter. Fortunately, there is still room in shelters. We want people to understand that they do still have time, some of them, to get to some of those shelters, get out of homes. That's something they might not be thinking about. But hopefully, Victor, we hope you stay safe, the crew stays safe. But we are going to take you live to Florida Governor Rick Scott as soon as he walks up to the podium there. Do stay close. You're watching breaking news coverage of Hurricane Irma, and our coverage continues now with Smokanish.